All right, namaste everyone. Welcome to today's panel event presented to you by Southwest Hindu YUVA entitled Dharmic Politics. My name is Saket Puri. I am a master's student studying political science at UT Dallas. So as the midterm elections are coming up this year, we at Hindu YUVA wish to raise awareness about the importance of voting and moreover, the importance of thinking about why we vote the way we do. Now, today's political landscape can often seem a bit disorienting with both sides appearing to be entrenched in their own political bubbles, unable nor willing to engage in constructive conversation with the other side. Now, in such a malaise, forming and evaluating our own political opinions may seem a bit difficult. But I think thinking back to our foundation of all our actions in life as Hindus, our Dharma, can perhaps inform our politics with better clarity. But of course, politics is an arena in which there's no clear right answer or even an apparent quote unquote dharmic political ideology. Nonetheless, I do think it is possible to explore how our own personal understanding of dharma shapes the contours of our political beliefs and tendencies. Now, this conversation will be focused on precisely that exploration. But before we begin, I would like to offer a caveat on the purposes of this conversation, as political discussions have the tendency of touching upon sensitivities. So I'll say from the outset that the purpose of that Hindu YUVA today is not endorsing in any way the views put forth by our panelists. But Hindu YUVA does believe in the pursuit of knowledge, intellectual curiosity, and the power of constructive dialogue. So in that vein, this event should be simply seen as a few college students in the spirit of conversation, reflecting upon how they individually see their understanding of Hindu Dharma impact their political perspectives. So with that said, we'll try to keep this around an hour and strive for an amicable and hopefully insightful conversation. Now, as your moderator today, I'll do my best to keep this discussion on track and move at a reasonably brisk pace. Also, throughout this conversation, we'll be allowing people to comment in the live stream. So please ask any questions you think you want to ask the panelists here, and we'll try to fit them in at the end of the discussion today. So first, we'll focus on the more foundational questions regarding our Dharma and how we think the role of government should be structured. And then we'll focus on a more policy-centered conversation. Now, with that said, joining us today, we have Advaita Chaudhary, a sophomore studying women's gender and sexuality studies on a pre-health track at Dartmouth, Shaunak Tabir, a sophomore studying biomedical engineering at A&M, and Bharat Nair, also a sophomore studying computer engineering and pre-law at UT Dallas. Thank you all for being here. So let's dive right in. So I think before we begin, from the outset, it is important that we sort of give some definition to our understanding of Dharma. So first question I'll ask to the panelists is, in the context of society, how do you define Dharma and what sorts of values or properties do you think there are that you can associate with them? Advaita can begin.
Yes, so for me, I personally define dharma as the various responsibilities that each person carries across the various roles that they play, throughout their life. Certainly at any given point in life, you can have multiple responsibilities, or you can have one responsibility, and that varies radically across, the role that you're in. Like, I'm a sister and a student and I have various other jobs, and my dharma varies radically across every single one of those roles. And so some values that I associate with that, just within the context of the society that we live in today, is like equity, because we live in a society that's rife with adharma, at least in my opinion. And certainly there are lots of disparities in being able to, live a meaningful and fulfilling life such that you can fulfill your dharma. And so I value equity quite strongly, which is bridging those gaps in order to live fulfilling life that will allow you to engage in your dharma and fulfill your responsibilities. And a lot of what goes into that for me is the notion of like freedom of choice, because you have the choice to engage in actions, but you don't have freedom from the consequences of those actions. So the freedom to choose is something that I value pretty significantly.
Okay, Shaunak?
Yeah, so like Advaita said, everybody has a different dharma and you have different roles in different parts of your life. But for me personally, when it comes to society and when it comes to government, I believe the dharma of a society and of a nation should be to protect the weak in its nation. So because I believe that is the fundamental core of any strong society, is to protect the weak. And I come about this dharma because of my understanding of Matsya, which is the which is a theory proposed or something that first written in Arthashastra by Chanakya, who said that in the natural world there is a law of the fishes where the big fish eats the small fish, and the role of a government is to disrupt that order where the big fish constantly eat the smaller fish and protect the weak. And so I think that when I look at government and society, I look at through that lens, and when I'm thinking about dharma, I look at through that lens.
Namaste, everyone. In my definition of Dharma, in contrast to Advaitas or Shaunaks, is the idea that when it comes to government and politics, or even society as a whole, we need to look to Dharma as a guiding principle in specific aspects. For example, I think government should be focusing on sustainability and freedom. And here's the reason why. Because sustainability is the #1 goal of any society. You can't have a society that just lasts for a short term, but we're trying to have long-term progress. So that kind of sustainability, that kind of growth with a positive moving society is what a dharmic principle should be. And policies that looks towards long-term potential and long-term growth is what we should look at. But at the same time, whilst having those kind of policies, we should ensure that the people have the freedoms to do what they choose to do. And so me and Advaita might have a similar bridge on that end, that we say that freedom of choice of the people is quite important. And that freedom of choice goes across a lot of things. However, it shouldn't abridge, or it should not encompass other people's freedom of choice as well.
Okay. Do we think good definitions provided? But do we think do we have any problems with anyone's definition of dharma or how they apply it to society here? Any thoughts on that?
But yeah, I mean, I have a thought about Bharat's definition of sustainability and stability. I mean, when I look at society, I see something that constantly changes and evolves and is always accepting and interacting with new kinds of people. And so when you talk about sustainability, I can't really, it's hard for me to understand how you can sustain something that is constantly evolving. Like the only constant in a society is change. So what does that mean when you say sustainability in that way? Because there's always going to be new people coming in, new ideas flourishing.
Which is true. And new ideas, and when new ideas come in, only the most sustainable ideas will survive. So the idea of survival of the fittest, the idea of sustainability lasts no matter what kind of change is thrown at it. Only the strongest, only the best type of ideas will survive. And we've seen that time and time again in policies and types of government in many aspects. Ones that survive are the ones that work. And they work for a reason, because they sustain the people and they provide for the freedoms of people to do what they want, because that's the most potential that a society can grant a human being. The idea of letting them do what they can at the absolute best that they possibly could.
So I have a question for Parth as well. When you say sustainability, are you referring to like environmental sustainability, economic sustainability? Just any clarification on how you would define like what sustainability means to you?
Of course, I mean sustainability in all aspects. But the key part of my definition or my dharmic principle or my dharmic way of life is the idea that it's not just sustainability in one aspect. You can't have sustainability in one aspect and not have the sustainability, or like this is when you progress towards sustainability in one avenue or one aspect of life, that should not be a way to have a lack of sustainability in another. So if you're focusing on one aspect like climate change or the world, then you don't want the sustainability that you're focusing on that to, over encompass or go over the idea of sustainability in person's freedom. So there needs to be a good balance in society. So the Matsya principle is great, but the problem is that if you don't let the big fish eat the small fish, then all the big fish eventually start dying out. So there needs to be a balance of how much we protect what and how much we do of what.
Okay. So now we've kind of established what our own understanding of dharma is in society. I think we should also have a good understanding of the human condition and how that can shine light on how we see society best flourish, because that is ultimately the goal of politics. And ultimately, our worldview and our dharmic worldview will be at the heart of our political discussions. So In what way do you see your dharma impact your politics? And how does your worldview shaped by your understanding of this dharma? Sean?
I can go ahead with that one. So, it's like I said, when I look at politics through the lens of dharma or government, I look at what policies are going to achieve the dharma of protecting the weak, and so that's my number one thing. So when I'm looking at a policy put forth by a political party, I'm always thinking about how, well, what are the intentions of this, and what are the impacts that it's going to have on not just on the common people, on the weak people in society, because they're the people who don't have a voice, who don't have any kind of freedom to do whatever they want in the world. And if a policy is put forth that is made in bad faith, or is made in good faith, but does not lead to this specific goal of protecting the weak, then it's not a policy that should be implemented, in my opinion. So that's the lens I view politics. And while it might seem a little bit like, while it might seem kind of black and white, that if this protects the weak or this does not, there is a lot of room for grays here, because when I say protect the weak, I don't just mean defeat the strong as well, or like get rid of the strong too. I mean, is it stopping the predation of the weak from the strong for unjust reasons?
Advaita?
Yes. So I think when you just look at like world history, Hinduism certainly predates the existence of, colonialism and globalization and all of these like really awful things that have happened, atrocities that have occurred throughout human history that have led to the amount of disparities that we have in today's world. And so because the world that we live in is so like we live in like Kali Yuga, right, which is the age of sin, and it's full of adharma, I don't just like straight take my Hindu values and apply them directly onto politics. I don't necessarily use dharma to just directly, affect how I vote, but rather my understanding of dharma and my understanding of Hinduism certainly impacts my values, and my values are obviously the basis of how I vote. And so something that's really important to me is that the notion of like artha and kama, which is like wealth and pleasure, being bound by the notions of like dharma and then karma, so like consequences of the consequences of your actions. And so the world that we live in right now, especially with like how capitalism is certainly designed, consistently like reinforces this idea of like prioritizing artha rather than prioritizing your duty or your dharma. And so I think that this like focus on wealth and this focus on like materialistic pleasure is what I view to be like the number one thing wrong with the world. And so the policies that I would like are to, bridge those, maybe kind of bring that focus back to dharma. And the way in which we would do that is, I guess, stop validating consistently this chase for wealth and rather bridge those gaps that would allow people to fulfill their responsibilities such that we have like equal access to opportunities to pursue materialistic wealth at some point. So that is how my my understanding of Hinduism affects how I vote.
All right.
So I agree and disagree with a lot of what my co-panelists have said. However, I think that the number one guiding principle that I have seen my worldview or how Dharma has shaped my worldview is that I think Dharma is an inherently individualistic idea, because each individual should do what they're morally obligated to do to sustain a good life. And if each individual does what they're morally responsible and morally obligated to do, then society as a whole will eventually start flourishing, because that's how society grows. Each person does its role, does what they need to do, then they'll get to a successful place, which in turn makes sure that society as a whole succeeds. And so Dharma provides a mission or a purpose, a way to sustain such a society. And so the government should create and uphold a society that allows for individual freedoms and liberties as much and as possible, whilst protecting and sustainable life. Meaning that we need to make sure that we provide the people, we provide society with as much freedoms and liberties as they can do, so that they can go ahead and achieve their dharma, because their dharma can only be achieved by themselves. No one else can tell them what their dharma is, because that's an inherently individualistic idea.
Okay.
Can I ask Bharat the question again? So I think it's great to maximize freedoms and liberties and everything, but then you have to assume that when you do that, when people have the most amount of freedom and liberty, that they will automatically go on the path of righteousness and go and achieve their dharma, as I can assume from your statements, right? So, but my problem is that on the path to achieving their dharma, and what if they steer a little bit? What if they deviate? And what if they decide to do bad things, like go back to the natural order of Matsyanaya, like I said, big fish, little fish, all that stuff. And who is going to, at that point, who is going to protect the little guy, the weak guy, you know? What and who, if we don't have if we allow people to do whatever they want and maximize all of their freedoms,
Mhm.
I'm assuming you want to temper that with something. So how would you?
There is something in Hindu philosophy, it's called karma. The whole point is that in order to protect the little guy, you don't get an even bigger guy to squash this medium-sized guy. The whole point is that you try to let the natural order of things go through with what it's supposed to do. When Dharma isn't upheld, a yuga like Kali Yuga starts happening, right? People as a whole aren't doing what they're dharmically supposed to do. They're not being morally good people. Hence why we have this yuga, right? The idea is that you as a human are not the one who can decide whether or not another person is steering from moral righteousness or not. You have no authority. The authority is given up to nature. The authority is given up to the cycle of karma. If you do bad things, morally bad things, karma catches up to you. That's the whole point of our dharmic principles.
In the meantime, until it catches up to you, isn't somebody being hurt?
People get hurt. Life isn't fair, right? People get hurt. Life isn't fair. The whole point is that the natural order of things keep going the natural way. The moment you as a human decide to say, hey, I am God, I think this person's doing something wrong or this person's doing something right, that's when you decide to go on a morally wrong path.
Well, I am not the one deciding.
So then you want a government to decide, right?
We live in a representative government, which is decided by
so
the will of everybody. So a bunch of people
want to decide. So exactly. So a bunch of people want to decide who's doing right and who's doing wrong. That's still irrelevant.
Well, what else do we have?
That we have the natural way of things, right? We have nature. We have our karmic principles. If we're looking at a dharmic view of politics, we look at how does Hinduism or how does a dharmic way of life make sure that balance is achieved. And that's what we're trying to get at. We're trying to make sure that the balance is achieved in society. And the only way we can get balance to achieve in society is let people do things. The moment you let people do things and make sure they have the potential to achieve the dharma, if they steer away from dharmic, if their dharmic potential, then their karma will catch up to them and get them what they deserve.
All right.
Yeah, so I just wanted to kind of chime in. Like, I certainly agree with you on this aspect of like, like freedom and like dharma being super individualistic, which I very much agree with. But I do also think it's, worth considering that, whenever like in Hindu history or like in, throughout our scriptures, whenever a dharmic, whenever there was more adharma than dharma, like the natural order of things, like it didn't kind of just go back to normal. Like the devas intervened and there was this like mass intervention from like an even bigger fish, if you want to call it. That's why we have the Mahabharata and we have, so many of the stories that we have. And so I guess my question kind of is how is this natural order just, when is it going to kick in essentially? Because throughout our lifetime, what we see is that we see individuals who engage in adharma in today's society. Like, for example, billionaires who actively engage in the exploitation of laborers through, paying very, very low wages or through providing like awful workplace conditions. They're the ones who like continue to like be validated for this behavior because they're the ones who can, have so much privilege, but also have the money to like buy their way through life. So when do you believe that this like natural order, or, when will they face the karma of their actions, I guess is my question.
All right,
so
I'll give Bharat 30 seconds to respond.
I'll take more like 45. I say there's like two avenues. One is the cycle of reincarnation, right? That's the, when that happens, cycle of reincarnation determines how your karma is and make sure that you get the justice you deserve. And the second aspect to answer your question is, yes, there is a higher power. That higher power comes in to intervene. You as a human is not that higher power. And according to our scriptures, the 10th avatar of Vishnu is supposed to come down. When the adharmic principles have gone too far and the justice cannot be done at all whatsoever, then the 10th avatar comes down and makes sure that everything is restored back to balance. That's the natural way of life. The whole point is that you can't really have the humans decide what is right and wrong, because humans aren't the one. In any of our scriptures, it's not. Like, for example, you talk about billionaires exploiting. Yes, back in the day, we had slaves, we had eunuchs, we had so many things that were so bad, right? We had exploitive labor even back then. But doesn't mean that the restoration of balance or justice was not done. But it just shouldn't be done at the hands of a human.
Well, justice was done at the hands of a human. We passed laws, like our humans passed laws. I mean, what do we do about day-to-day injustices? Not about overall 1,000-year-long waiting for the 10th avatar.
Right.
What can we do about that?
Day-to-day justices can be like managed only if you make sure that like the moment people have Dharmic principles that disrupt the way of natural order things, disrupt the balance of society, that's when you have to step in as a human and say, hey, maybe we should have a law for this. And that's it. But we can't really try and focus on, a whole billionaires thing or any of that stuff. But we'll move on.
We will touch upon this theme of the natural versus what society should do to address these issues. In our next question, which will be, what is the proper role and dharmic role of government? I think Advaita can start.
Yeah, so I believe that the government can act as a great tool in allowing individuals to, or in supporting individuals in being able to fulfill their responsibilities such that they are able to, stay on the dharmic path and like continue to fulfill their dharma. I think that, as I've been saying, with equity being something that I heavily value, I think that at least part of the government's duty is to, promote equity. So equity basically means like providing people with access to, the resources or almost like help that they need in order to have everyone on equal footing as far as access to opportunities. Now, whether or not they choose to take advantage of those opportunities after that point is their decision, and they will face the consequences or the karma of their actions later on, whether in this life or in a future life through reincarnation. But I think that the government's job, at least with how the world looks like right now, is to, like bridge gaps and disparities. And we have a lot, in my opinion, like we have a lot of work to do on that front. And there's a lot that the government can be doing, particularly since we're in a pandemic right now, to, bridge those gaps in inequity. And I think that that can be done through various means, financial or, policy wise as well.
Shanak?
Okay, so let me start off by saying that. So what I said in the start about the Matsyanaya, about the natural order of things, is that there are strong and there are weak, and inevitably the strong will eat the weak, or the big fish will eat the little fish, right? And so what the government is there for, in my opinion, is like a collection of little fishes that come together and make the strongest fish to stop the other strong fishes who are going to naturally be really strong from destroying the weak fishes who can't do anything about it. So that, in my opinion, that is like the number one role for the government, which is why we have any kind of governor society in the first place, is to do that, what I specifically said. And the way it takes place can be through a range of policies, and in today's world, it'd be applied differently. But that is why we have such a thing as a representative government, right? It's for that specific reason, because we know that there are strong people and there are weak people, but everybody has something to offer, and strong people, some strong people might predate on the weak people, and to stop that from happening, we create a government. So I think that is a dharmic role for government. When it comes to dharma, that is the role, that is the dharmic nature of the government, is to provide protection from the strong on the weak. And that's what Chanakya also said in Arthashastra, to have a strong authority. He used the word authoritative, but I don't know about exactly the word authoritative, but he said we need a strong government that can disrupt the natural order of Matsyanaya. So that's, in my opinion, that's the dharmic role for a government. Just like everybody has dharma, their own dharma, that is one of the dharmas, one of the most important duties, dharmas of the government.
So, I mean, again, I will disagree with Shanak on the idea of Matsyanaya on the extent as which you're supposed to go. So I think, yes, you should be protecting the weak. The whole point of government's role in society is to make sure that individuals' freedoms and overall like access to certain resources is protected, making sure that the weak isn't preyed upon. Yes. However, the extent at which it is the question at hand, because I believe that a small scale limited government that has more balances and checks on a federal power is the right way, or the more dharmic way, in my way, that'll provide for a more sustainable or more free society. Because the moment you create a bigger fish to the big fish, you're just all you're doing is adding to the natural way of there being a small fish, a big fish, and now a bigger fish. What you should be doing is making sure that the big fish that's already existent in society gets split up a little bit, making sure that, the small fish isn't all populated in one area, so the big fish has ease of access to eating all of them. You should try to protect the fish, not try to be overpowering the fish. At the end of the day, the point is that the moment you give power more to the local government, the moment you give power more to local municipalities because they know what's best for their people and provide more freedoms to their people, you will see a more progressing society. Because local, not one size fits all policy always has proven to be working in society. The moment you have one person in Washington, D.C. decide, hey, this is what should happen in all 50 states of the United States, you don't see any kind of improvement occurring. And that's the current disruption that we see. That's why I think when our founding fathers in the United States created the Constitution, we saw the checks and balance and federalism that once used to be there. And the moment we started increasing the power of the federal government is when we see more and more economic downturn occurring.
Okay. I would urge us to sort of move beyond the fish metaphor. I think we can talk less in fish terms, and we can move on to more practical terms as well. But we can always touch upon the idea behind the metaphor, sure.
Yeah.
Okay, so that question took some time. So I just want to touch upon one more thing relating to this sort of dharmic role of government. If you want to respond to anyone else during this question, you can keep it short and do so. But Bharat touched upon sort of federal power versus state power, local power. So the question should be, are local governments where power should mostly be held, or is there value in having a strong centralized government?
Can I take this from start? Okay. So I know Bharat said all that stuff, but I feel like we have a lot to agree on, more than we disagree at this point. I mean, I know I said what I said, but I didn't. But the 80% of stuff that you said, I do agree with. That local power is generally, people know what's best for themselves. I agree with that statement, and the governments as they form on a small scale are to help with that, right? But a small local government is another prey for the big. Okay, I don't want to use this metaphor anymore. But a small local government is not gonna be strong enough to stand up to anything larger than itself. That's why we have a federal government that's their only role. I mean, I do think we should have a federal government, and I do think it should not be incredibly huge and a centralized state in America. I'm talking about just America. So in our country, we have the federal government for the main reason that I mentioned, right? The protection of the weak. And historically speaking, that we needed that government after we saw, after we saw the collapse of the Articles of Confederation government, which was very weak and could not do anything to actually enforce any of its laws and to create any kind of equity or any kind of equality that we needed. So that's why we have a government in the first place, right? That's why we have the federal government. And so I do think that the local people know what's best for themselves, but the federal government is there to provide a sense of national unity and pride, to realize that you are beyond just your state or beyond just your municipality or county or whatever, and B, to do large scale actions that can't be done by just coordination between local counties and local state governments, right? There has to be a large assembly of body that can do tasks that we as a society agree is best for everyone. That we agree in the first 10 amendments of the Bill of Rights, right? We agree that freedom of speech, bear rights, bear arms, everything else. Those things are there because those are things that we all agree on. And a federal government is to enact those policies in the context of fulfilling its dharma of protecting the weak. I mean, that's why we have, I don't want to get too political, but we are, but the right to bear arms, right? That's why we have that. That's one of the biggest reasons. And the weak, taking away that from the weak is automatically going to be leaving them defenseless. So that's why I think that we have a federal government to do the things that we all can agree upon. And as soon as, but the thing is that nowadays we can't agree on anything anymore. So that's why we have the structure is falling apart. And that's why it feels like people think it's either too big or it's too small, because we can't agree on anything that needs to be done. So yeah, I'll leave the rest up to you two, but that's my view on that.
Right. And Shanak, you're absolutely 100% correct on that.
Okay, the mute function isn't working. Advaita, you can take this question.
Yeah, so I was going to say, I certainly agree with Bharat's, view that, the people certainly like know what they want, and local government has a lot of power in terms of having the best understanding of what, they're the closest to the group of people that they're representing. So certainly they have, like much stronger insight than perhaps the federal government would. However, this idea that like, one person sitting in Washington, D.C. and like telling like overseeing like 50 different states, like that is what government is. Like that's what a presidency is. It's like this notion that this is like inherently oppressive is something that I like heavily like disagree with, and if for me, like one of the benefits that I see for like, having power in the federal government is, for example, like marriage, right? Like when LGBTQ marriage was legalized in 2015, right? Like before that, it was like you're married in one state, but you're not married in another state. And it's like, well, what happens when you cross like state lines, So certainly that's one huge example where there's a lot of merit to the federal government. Another example is like, purchasing like COVID vaccines, for example, so that people don't have to cross state borders to go to a state where they have the most access to, healthcare and to this vaccine, which is also another notion that certainly favors the wealthy if that were the case. And so on like a partisan level, I'm certainly like indifferent towards, like strong central government versus local government. It has more to do with, whatever it takes in order to bridge those disparities to allow people to remain on the most dharmic path is certainly what I would support.
Bharat?
Yeah, so what I would point Shanak to in asking that question is when he talked about how we have basic necessities for the federal government to do to make sure that specific resources are provided and all, et cetera, et cetera. We have a document for that, and it's called the Constitution of the United States. And that document gives the federal government specific enumerated powers to which it can and cannot do, right? What it should and should not do. You cited the Bill of Rights. That's just the tip of the iceberg. We have all the articles, exactly what the president can do, cannot do, what the Congress can and cannot do, as well as what the justice system can and cannot do. So we have these enumerated powers to give into the federal government, and it says very clearly in the 10th Amendment that these are the enumerated powers given to the federal government. Everything else should be left up to the states. And there's a reason we give that federalistic idea of government in the Constitution, is because, yes, you're right. We have interstate commerce laws. We have specific things in terms of purchasing COVID vaccines, sure, public health, military, taxes, so many things. We need to have a coordinated facility in the federal government in DC so that, everything happens a little bit more efficiently, quote unquote. But at the same time, we're giving more powers to the state governments because the whole point is that the only role of the federal government should be what can the state government possibly not do at all. And the idea is that make sure to understand that in order to have a sustainable and more free society, the only thing we can actually do is make sure that the bigger fish has less power in its hands, right? You got to make sure that people have more power, and the moment people have more power, the more free they are, the more dharmic potential they actually have.
Okay, so since that question was directed to me, I'll answer it pretty quickly. In my opinion, the power that the people have is the government that they create. That's the power that the people have in order to, they're not creating, that's how you give them, that's how they use their freedom, is to give themselves power through collective action. That's where the power comes from. And when you talk about the state and local government, and we have the federal government enlisted powers and all of that, the thing is when the Constitution enumerates, if you want to talk about constitutional text, when the Constitution enumerates powers to the federal government, it gave those powers in the context of 1787. It gave those powers in the context of that year, and those powers have been stretched. Their definition of those words has been stretched to fit whatever that needs to be stretched with.
That's the
those
problem.
Words have been that you can say that's a problem, but also you can say that that's kind of needed. We can't always just literally stick to that text. I mean, where in the Constitution does it say the government should be able to?
All right, I want to move a little away from constitutional analysis and more back to our dharmic perspective, if we can. Sorry,
Yeah.
Shah.
Yeah.
But
So I mean, I can finish that thought with the
Just
Dharmic perspective.
10 seconds.
Okay. So right, but I'm just trying to say that to protect the weak, the times change and the world changes, and we can't stick to a single piece of text in order to fulfill the dharma of the government. Dharma is not confined to a set of words. It is an ideal, and it is the responsibility of the government to do things, and it is not confined to a set of words. So you can't rely on those set of words to do everything, right? Things change and things evolve, and we can't be stuck in the 1787 mindset.
Okay. Yeah, Advaita.
Yes. So I also think it's like worth considering in this situation specifically is, at least for me, it's not about who has the power, right? Like it's about the intentions of the person who has the power, right? So just because we're checking and balancing the government and restricting its power, I mean, if you look at the world that we live in today, like we are all like essentially capitalistic stooges. We are more or less slaves to big corporations. Like I'm someone who's studying to be a physician. I know that I am fully bound by like the like requirements and the ruling of big pharma, even if the government isn't oppressing me necessarily, right? So I think that for me, even if we were to like restrict the government's power and write all of these words that prevent the government from like oppressing the people, which I do think is important, I think that it's important to consider, like, regardless of like who has the power, like what are they going to do with that power, right? Are they dharmic individuals who truly like care about virtue and care about allowing other individuals to continue to stay on the path to dharma? Or are they people who are chasing after artha and or chasing after wealth and are very like self-absorbed and look into their own interests, which I believe to be adharmic? So I think that's a question that we should all or that's something that we should definitely like think about, and because it's something that was really, really hard for me to accept, or even like learn just growing up until I came to college and I finally and I worked and I realized like, wow, this, it's not about like who has the power, but what they do with it and why.
Just a quick 10-second response, just close it all up. I'll say that the point of my whole spiel about the government is that I believe the individual people still run the corporation, but the problem with a government having the power, or even quote unquote intent of power, lies in the government. Is the issue is that a bunch of people are getting to decide what one person can and cannot do, and that's not allowed. I don't buy into the philosophy that the intent is the real thing that we look after, because the intent of every single person in life is to succeed, is to achieve their potential, is to make sure they do as good as they can. But the intent of a government is undecided, because it's a bunch of people deciding what they want to do in the moment. And so I think the intent argument is valid, but the problem is that the intent of the government is always worse than the intent of the corporation.
Okay, nice. Okay, so I think now we have like sort of established our dharmic understanding of government and worldview. So I think now we can move into more policy-centered concepts. So one thing Shaunak brought up was sort of the protection of the small fish, so to speak. So an idea here we can discuss is the value of having a social safety net, either on a voluntary basis or on a governmental basis. And I'd like to pose the question, do we think that there's a dharmic perspective on having such a social safety net? Should it be provided by the government, or are local communities sufficient? Shaunak, you wanna?
Okay, so I can start if you want me to. Yeah, I do think there is a dharmic role. I mean, my whole thing was protecting the weak, right? And this is one of the most important, one of the best ways to do that is to literally just give them some kind of welfare. I mean, I'm not saying that we need to give everybody, like a $15 check every second for sitting around doing nothing, but I'm talking about things like unemployment benefits, or things like better healthcare and stuff like that. So I think it's better to be left to the local community? I think it depends on the kind of community, first of all, right? I mean, that's not I mean, we can see that in like places like India or like places like China, where like they have strong local identity, and they have like local family and tradition where they will take care of each member of their community simply because they're part of the community. But like in America, we have a very individualistic culture, and we can't rely on everybody else to take care of us. We have to, we need, so we have nobody else. Like the people are very individualistic here. And the only person or the only thing that can take care of them when they're down on the luck through no fault of their own is some kind of welfare, some kind of government system. Because like I said many times now, the government is a tool of the people to achieve things. And if the people agree that there are certain people that need to be taken care of because they are unfairly predated upon or unfairly looked unfairly on bad luck, then I think the government is a way that we enact that welfare. But yeah.
Yeah, so for me, I do believe that there is a dharmic perspective on having a social safety net. And I think that one huge way that we do see that certainly Hinduism and like Hindu Dharma encourages having a social safety net is through how much we value seva within our culture. So the notion of like selfless service, it's something that my like parents like instilled in me from a young age. And it was the idea that donating time is far more valuable than like donating like money is. Certainly money is important in the world that we live in, but there's nothing that can truly substitute, donating time or, providing like action. There's like a wonderful subhashit about this as well that I like grew up listening to. I forgot what it is, but forgot the exact like phrasing of it. But, I think like an English translation would be like, give a man a fish and he won't be hungry for a day, but teach a man how to fish and he'll be, he'll be essentially be set for life. So I think that a social safety net that the government can certainly engage in is like prioritizing like education more, and also like creating settings where local communities can engage in more seva. Like if you're having to work like 40 plus hours a week on like minimum wage, trying to like make ends meet, like how are you supposed to volunteer? Like if that time that you spend volunteering or like engaging, I guess like engaging in seva is a better way of phrasing that. How are you supposed to engage in seva when you're, you barely have enough time to like provide for your family? And so I think that the government can step in here by like holding back, individuals or like corporations that promote such like dharmic practices, but also by like the actions that the government could engage in to create a social safety net would be to, put in policies into place that aren't just like handing out money, but certainly also like rebudgeting things and doing and creating systems that allow individuals to engage in more seva. And I think that seva also just beyond helping other people, it almost in many ways like helps you. It allows you to meet groups, meet people that you wouldn't have met otherwise. And that's something for me growing up has been among like the most like valuable experiences of my life.
Okay, all right.
So essentially, if I understood Advaita correctly, is she's trying to say we need to get the government to foster an environment to provide for seva, not using financial means, but by rebudgeting. So rebudgeting money. So the point is that I'm trying to make is that there is no way that a government can try and help society in terms of seva or in terms of social services without having some sort of financial backing or financial like motivation towards it. So at the end of the day, what we have to really look towards is individual freedom. So I was with Advaita when she was talking about seva and how dharmic principles were talking about, hey, selfless service. Even HSS's motto is selfless service, or so may begin that we get to success by our own hard work. That's how you do it. There's so many examples and stories from our Hindu scriptures where even the most poorest person who's working for rice to rice, so live on the basic necessities, still provide something back to community. And so yes, Shanak, I do agree with you that back in Indian society or in Asian, typically Asian cultures, there's a strong sense of family, strong sense of community, hence people help each other out. But in America, that's gone. It used to be there once upon a time, at least back when people were a little bit more religious, but it used to exist. It's not like it just never happened. The people are just unkind to the United States, but no, there is. So what I'm trying to get at with all of these examples is that in Dharma, we have a moral principle and ethical idea to preserve and sustain a good society. And at the end of the day, what you as an individual does to give back to the community is what matters. Because historically, we have seen governments or kingdoms build roads or mines, but they were never running the economy. Like the kings might have maybe had like a surplus of food sometime, but they didn't run healthcare. They didn't restrict ownership of weapons. They didn't run education and didn't even subsidize farmers. They were historically restricted because when you come to a dharmic society, large and complex systems aren't sustainable and aren't dharmic. So you let people and have social safety nets left up to people, charities, volunteer organizations. So you incentivize those kind of organizations to be there for the people. You don't have we don't have big government trying to decide, hey, I'll give you $1,000 every month. That should help you out. Or, hey, let's try and make every single college free for you. That should definitely help you out. No, none of that works. What does work is making sure that people are capable and are willing to give back to community. So we should be fostering an environment of selflessness, of charity, rather than trying to create a society of following just one's own passions in terms of money. So that greed in society that we see today is the issue. But at the same time, you can't force someone to be charity, to give charity. You can't force someone to do seva. If they dharmically decide that's what they should and should not do, then they'll do it. If they don't, they realize that, oh, I don't really want to give back to society. That's on them. That's their karmic principles. That'll catch up to them eventually. But at the end, what I'm trying to get at is that you gotta focus on
30 seconds. Yeah.
Yes. So I was going to say that it's also worth, when we're talking about ancient societies, and if you want to talk about like free college or just like the notion of free things, if you think about like Takshashila, which is an ancient Hindu university, and you want to talk about like free colleges, the only money that from my understanding, that you had to pay was a guru dakshina. And so you weren't like paying like hundreds of thousands of grand and so much money and like tuition the way we do in today's world. Like college was like most definitely like free, if not like close to free. It was not nearly as expensive as it is today. But if a student was too poor to be able to avoid Guru Dakshina, the king would actually step in and pay the Guru Dakshina for the student, because it was actually considered pap or sin, and a huge slur on this king's reputation or the government's reputation, to not step in and do so. So if you want to talk about like the notion of like free colleges, that certainly existed, within like Hinduism, and it was actually dharmic for that intervention of the government to be there. Also, if we want to talk about like, I certainly agree that you do need money to engage in like actions, right? But that's what the government can get that money through like taxes that we all pay, but also what if we just tax the corporations like the way they're supposed to be taxed all along, right? If you just like look up any fact on how much the biggest corporations pay in like taxes, there's so many loopholes that they go through to like avoid it, right? And if these like corporations or whoever it is responsible for preventing individuals from acquiring the wealth or like living this like normal standard of life, certainly that social safety net of the government stepping in and stopping those individuals is dharmic.
Okay, so one quick note, let's just all try to keep our answers a bit more concise. So if we say 10 seconds, 30 seconds, let's keep it that way. I don't want to mute people, but I'll do so if we need to. But yeah, so now our next question, move on to a more social end of things. Simply is there a dharmic perspective regarding abortion? And if there is, how do we see it as relevant today? I think maybe I can start with this one.
Yeah, certainly. So I believe that this is, as with most social issues, this is one that could go either way. But for me, I very, very strongly believe that in like the notion of choice. And so I believe that, if an individual who is pregnant cannot, reasonably provide for the person that they will be bringing into this world, whether that means emotionally, socioeconomically, or in various ways, it is dharmic for them to terminate that pregnancy by getting an abortion, rather than bringing a child into that world where they cannot, fulfill their parental duties and have a really poor quality of life for that child. Now, that doesn't mean that I believe that this person isn't going to face the consequences of karma for their actions, for better or for worse. Freedom from, the freedom of choice doesn't mean freedom from consequences. So I believe that it is like dharmic to get an abortion. Now, that's not me passing like a value on, whether or not like whether or not the fetus is alive or not alive, and like a moral judgment there. Because I also think it's, like Bharat was saying earlier, right? It's not the job of human beings to like step in and pass judgment on one another in that manner, right? Because of how the natural order of the world works. And so I, as like a human, like I'm not Bhagwan, like if this individual wants to get an abortion, then because of the natural order of the world, they will face the consequences of their actions, whether or not that's positive or negative. But within this lifetime, I certainly believe that it is dharmic for an individual to have the choice to have an abortion.
Shana?
Yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and say I agree with Advaita pretty much. I do believe it's dharmic. I believe there is room for in dharma to have an abortion. And while I don't agree with the killing of a human life, and if you were to define the fetus as a human life, then it would be adharmic to do that. But I believe that there's a larger context, and in that larger context, it's not such a black and white situation where you can just call it adharmic. I think in this kind of ambiguous gray area, we have to consider the realities of the situation at hand, and that we have to move beyond just philosophy and religion to talk about what people go through in the day-to-day lives. And in the day-to-day lives of average, like of a person thinking about getting an abortion, a woman trying to get an abortion, it's not something that they just do because they like it or because they want to have, I don't know. It's a well thought out opinion, and it's a well thought out plan that they're oftentimes forced to do for many different reasons. And so at that point, I don't think it's I'm not gonna say that I think humans have no right to pass judgment on other humans, because I do believe in the value of democracy, and I do believe that collective action has a very important role to play in our society and in realistically judging from right and wrong. But when something as personal and as severe as this, there's nobody else that can really say anything about if this is dharmic or adharmic. It's up to the individual who is getting that abortion, and it's between her and herself. I mean, there's literally no one else that can pass such a judgment on this topic. And if should the government be providing abortions, or should they be subsidizing this or whatever? Well, I think that while I don't think it's like while I don't think it's morally right or whatever, I do think that it's going to happen, and it's going to happen. And if you wanted to do it done right, you have to do it in a state sanctioned facility. Otherwise, it's going to be done with a coat hanger in a back closet somewhere. So, yeah.
Okay. All right, Bharat.
So dharma has to do with what is sustainable, or what is a good freedom of choice, or protecting the weak. And Chanak, you know what the weakest member of society is? The baby in the womb of a mother. And Advaita, do you know what the biggest choice that is lacking in a human is? A baby in the mother's womb, because they don't get the choice whether they can live or not. Their mother makes that choice for them. And Chanak, the weakest member, the baby in the womb, you just took away all rights. You literally telling, hey, mother, you can go ahead and kill me if you want. I'm the weakest member. Go ahead. I'll give you the tools to kill me if you want. So you're not protecting the weak, and you are not making sure that choice is being prevailed in society. You're deciding to decide that a mother's choice suddenly prevails another person's choice. At the end of the day, in a dharmic society, we see that the Dharma Shastras and Hindu scriptures clearly affirm that killing a human embryo or a Bruna Hatya is a mortal sin equivalent to killing a Brahmin. All right, it is fraught with grave consequences for the perpetrators, since it interferes with the orderly progression of the world. So I'm going back, making a full circle of my argument from the beginning. The idea that what is sustainable and what is not sustainable. Killing 5 million babies a year, not sustainable, right? But you know what is sustainable? Making sure that people make the choices that are rightful to them. So a good government should be promoting dharmic choices, not making sure that individuals are forced upon to do what they can and cannot do. But a killing of a life is where people should draw the line. If there's anything that democracy should be trying to fix, or making sure if there's anything in the world that other people should have an opinion on, is whether or not people can just go around killing people at any time they choose. Justice needs to be served at some point, and that's where I decide the line should be drawn, right? That I choose in my dharmic viewpoint where we should draw the line, because an abortion isn't about freedom of choice of a woman's freedom, or it has nothing to do with social political ideology, because in Hinduism or in a dharmic way of life, an abortion is a direct attack on nature, the balance, the way of life, right? You're deciding who's dying and who's not dying. But yes, you're right. Karma will catch up to them. Maybe it's a dharmic and karma will catch up to them. That's fine. But at the same time, there needs to be some justice done in society if you go and kill a person. That's it.
Yeah. So, you know, if we want to talk about like the notion of like choice and how, you know, the baby is like the weakest link who doesn't have a say, well, I guess I'm curious in that case why then in the Mahabharata, Ma Ganga had 8 sons who were the, you know, 8 Vasus that once they were born and she gave birth to them, King Shantanu's kids, she went and she killed them, like she threw them into the river, right? And so we certainly see examples like within Hinduism itself where like babies were killed and they didn't have a choice in that, right? But there was a reason why like Hindu Dharma makes like exceptions like that within like, you know, within the framework within like Hinduism, because we acknowledge that, you know, situation to situation, things,
If you know the
you know,
full
things
Mahabharata
vary.
story, that's not what it's about. Ma Ganga kills the babies in order to bring them salvation because there was a curse on those individuals, on those babies of Ma Ganga, so that if you kill them, they go directly to heaven. That's a completely different thing. You're literally talking about killing a baby that has like, you know, future potential and future things. And Ma Ganga did it, killed the babies in order to bring them to the maximum potential they can ever do. Bhishma, the only person that lived through that, suffered all his life and lives of multiple different generations of people as well. So you can't compare a actual scriptural story and try to justify your case because that is not valid at all. It stands on no grounds whatsoever.
Right. But what I'm saying, the point that I'm making is that situation to situation, like things vary, right? And so that's what I'm saying is that there is no like objective, like moral line here. And that's why the notion of like choice is so important to me, right? Like, you know, you understand why like Ganga Mata, like certainly like, you know, in order to bring those babies salvation, like had to kill them, right? Well, I guess my question is, how do you know that that's not the case with, you know, someone who gets an abortion today, right? Like we don't know that. We're mere humans. We wouldn't know that. And Hinduism itself, like, talks about that. But I also think it's worth considering that, you know, if we were to, you know, the notion of pro-life being like codifying, criminalizing abortion into the law, right? Well, abortion rates stay the same in countries where abortion is legal and illegal, but 3 out of 4 abortions are safe in countries where abortion is legal, is like legalized, and 9 out of 10 abortions are unsafe in countries where abortion is criminalized. And so I guess my question is like, well, if you're if you want to, you know, criminalize abortion or you want to restrict access to it, well, how is that dharmic? Because you're certainly leading to like, you're certainly contributing to high maternal mortality rates and high mortality rates from complications from back alley abortions, since the rates are staying the same, but they're done in unhealthy, non-medically like, you know, like in non-medically like sanitary situations in countries where abortion is illegal.
Okay, I think we can put a pin on it there. Question was mainly for Dharmic perspective on abortion itself. Not so much as like how the government should intervene or not intervene or provide for or restrict abortion. So I think we can pause it there for that conversation. But I think we all gave some good thoughts and good perspectives there. Next policy area I want to move on to is climate change, which is a pretty important thing, I think, in today's day and age, very heavily discussed. So maybe we can start off with Shonak. Do you think there's a Dharmic perspective on climate change? Or let me rephrase the question, actually. Do you think there's a Dharmic perspective on what society should do about climate change?
Yeah. When it comes to climate change, it's something that if we take a big picture view at it, it's something that affects every single person, but not affects every single person equally, obviously. But it does affect the entirety of the human race. And dharmically speaking, we've all learned and we all grew up about, you know, about Mother Earth and like praying to Earth and all of that. And it's like it's in our tradition to respect nature. I mean, if we were to extrapolate that tradition to the whole world, then we have to understand that, yeah, we have to take care of our Earth. And I think everybody on this panel will agree that what we're doing to the world right now is not sustainable, is not good. As Bharat said, it is not sustainable it goes against his idea, and it's not increasing equity or access to anything. And it is affecting the people in poorer countries more than it is affecting anywhere else. Like places like Haiti and even India, by like 2100, most of India is going to be the land is going to be unfarmable. So it's going to be pretty bad if we continue climate change in the rate that it is going right now for most people. But dharmically speaking, what should society do about it? I think climate change is a threat that we haven't faced in a while, and that only societies approaching the end of their existence have only faced before, like Indian facing Muslim attacks. I mean, we have to come together as a species and do something, and enact certain plans right now to do something about it. Otherwise, we will face years of destruction, right? I think we do need to start now, and dharmically speaking, it is going to cause instability. It's going to go against Bharat's whole idea of stability being the most important thing, but we can't always have stability if we want to make real important change in our society. And for climate change, I think it is dharmic to have a few decades of instability for there to in order to have a planet to live on.
Bharat, sustainability.
Yeah, so I think Shaunak is kind of right when it's like little preface portion where yes, we do see certain impacts coming to planet, but at the same time, what is the extent of the impacts is a whole different conversation that I would have with Shaunak. But in the dharmic perspective of what government should do, I agree. The government should maybe incentivize people to live better, be more eco. But I disagree with the idea that the government should be the one to implement real change, because we can see the most change being done, like eco change being done to society right now is by people like Elon Musk. Man is going around saving all kinds of things, building electric cars. We have Mr. Beast who's going over and cleaning the ocean. We have so many millionaires and billionaires, the ones actively being the front of real change economically, cleaning the oceans, the ocean projects, planting trees. We have so many like projects being done by millionaires and billionaires. What has the government done in the last 20 years to implement real climate change resolution? Nothing, because the moment you decide
by the same millionaires and billionaires.
How did they get gutted by the same millionaires and billionaires? There has not been a single thing that millionaires and billionaires can do to the government to try and gut them. See, you like try to focus on big oil and big corporations trying to resist to climate legislation. But guess what? The reason why they're able to resist big climate legislation is because they're being bought up by the government that you advocate should be the one to change the environment or promote change in the environment. You're never going to see that. So dharmic principle should be the moment people decide to live a dharmic life, a sustainable life, they will make sure that their society, their community, and in turn, their country and their world is a sustainable place, a more eco place, a more green place. The moment you decide and the moment you tell the government should be the one to step in and make this actual change, you won't see real change because you haven't seen in the past 50 to 60 years where we've been seeing real climate change issues come forth.
Yeah, so I think it's worth, I'll give my dharmic perspective on like climate change in a couple of seconds, but I think it's worth considering that the big corporations, like I wonder I question to what extent Elon Musk and all of these billionaires are creating these like environmentally friendly products because they actually care about the environment and they value sustainability versus like making profits, like profiting off of problems that they like heavily exacerbated to begin with, right? Like corporations have been so complicit in like carbon gas emissions and all of these things where they like, through industrialization, like contributed so heavily to climate change and like the holes in our like ozone layer right now. And then they're also now profiting off of like solutions to like make a bunch of money where they're like electric cars and this, and we care about sustainability and like blah, 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 right? So it's like the intention is so like, to me, like so unbelievably like dharmic. Like they do not, like Elon Musk creating like electric cars has very little to do with Elon Musk actually caring about climate change and 100% more about like making money from it. But in terms of like a dharmic perspective on climate change, I certainly think that there is one. Something that I was taught from a young age within Shaka is, I believe this was the shlok that, my parents taught me. It was Karage Vasate Lakshmi. And it was like, before you even set foot in the morning on the ground, you're more or less like apologizing to the earth, to like Bhumi Mata for stepping foot on her, right? So I think like, if we come from a culture that apologizes before even setting foot on the earth, like when we're literally like blowing the earth up, I think that like says a lot about how like climate change and like us exacerbating it is so unbelievably like dharmic, because we come from a culture that very, very much values the environment. That's why we celebrate like Nag Panchami, for example, right? Like what an obscure thing to like you think about, like, oh, why are you like worshiping snakes? Like we're not. It's because we believe in living in harmony with nature, and that's a very, very integral aspect of Hinduism, because living in harmony with nature is something that is very, very dharmic. because, we live on Earth. Like this is, Bhumi Mata, and we're taking up space on her.
And Advaita, you're 100% right. But the part you're wrong is that it's not the big corporations that have been complicit. It's the government that has been complicit. Big corporation has been directly attacking the environment since day one. They've been pretty open about it. Industrial revolution, green revolution, technological revolution, every single time big corporation is a lead attack on Mother Nature. They're 100% correct. But now look at it. The moment that they can see real change and real profits or whatever the incentive is, they're getting the incentive by becoming more green, and they're doing it. But the people that have been complicit is the very people that you think will create change. Those people have not created change in 60 years. But in the past 10 to 15 years, you have seen the people that started the problem start fixing the problem. So I see change in big corporation. I do not see change in the government fixing anything. Since Al Gore has ran for president, the same single statement has been said multiple times. The world's going to end in the next 20 years. The world's going to end in the next 20 years. It hasn't, and it most likely will not. The point is that the ozone layer has been fixing. We have seen emissions decrease. We have seen betterment in our society because the technological advancements brought by a capitalistic corporate-led entity, corporate-led economy has brought towards real green change. And yes, you're right. Our society comes from a good nature, believing and living in harmony with society ideology. But again, that's from the people. The king never said, hey, go worship the snakes, or the king never said, hey, live in harmony with the nature. No, because it's intuitive to people to live in harmony with nature. So again, the government trying to bring these solutions, they never have, because the people that are complicit in incentivizing pollution, in incentivizing the corporate gain in those sectors have always been the government.
Okay.
So I think it's, okay, well, first of all, Shauna, sorry, do we need to move on?
If you want to say something, just say quickly.
Yeah, I was going to say, well, if you look at the policies that the government has passed, regarding the release of CFCs, I believe is what they're called, that have held back corporations and forcing them into a corner, into curbing their carbon emissions and all of these other terrible things that they're putting in the environment. It's the government that's been doing that. Shaunak has more knowledge of the policies than I certainly do, but if you talk about the climate, the Paris Agreement and all of these things, it's the government that's been doing that. The corporations could not care less. They're in it for the profit. They're being forced into a corner, which is why we're seeing these ozone layers fixing itself. It's because the government is instituting restrictions on them.
Yeah, you can't have a free open market economy and at the same time expect them to care about the environment at all. They're gonna chase profits to every single end, and we have to make it unprofitable to chase fossil fuels. But that's not going to happen if there's no intervention by the government at all, and if everything happens to do this free market. And the reason why the government has not done too much about this in the last 30-40 years is because they've been held captive by big oil and big fossil fuel industries. And look at who is actually taking the change, right? In your own analogy, Elon Musk is the one taking the change. Elon Musk does not have a significant lobbying effort in government, right? So it's people outside this big oil group. But we need to stop big oil. That is the main idea. We can create an alternative to them, but if the problem exists in the first place, that to get rid of it is the main path.
Okay. I think the root of our...
Just a quick 10 seconds. Sorry.
Bharat, you can't override my mute. We have to move on. We're already over an hour, so I want to sort of wrap this up, draw to a close. We have discussed some domestic policy issues, but I think we should also discuss a little bit of foreign policy. So this is going to be a two-pronged question. How can the Hindu concept of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam be seen in America's approach to foreign policy, if at all? And if we want to touch on this, we can, but how does the party in power in America determine how India governs itself? So definitely answer the first question, but if you want to touch on the second one, please do so. Great, I can start, I guess.
Yeah, so I'm going to be totally upfront. My knowledge of foreign policy is significantly less than my knowledge of social issues, just by the nature of what I study in my major. But I certainly do believe, I think that we actually need to adopt the concept of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam in terms of our current approach to foreign policy. I think that like in many ways the US is like too involved in foreign policy in like other countries' affairs, but for all the wrong reasons. Like if you look at what's going on in the Middle East, like it has very much more to do with like big oil and like economic interests than like actually like caring about like, I don't know, like revenge for 9/11, I guess, or even like human rights like violations. I do like, the US obviously does have hegemony in terms of like the United Nations because of like World War II. But I actually think that we need to definitely adopt a more like non-interventionist approach in terms of like not maybe taking like our issues and like our problems and like kind of turning like other countries into like a dumping ground, and then also getting involved in their affairs, like creating these problems and then like making up like false solutions in order to like fix them. So I think that we need to, give other countries like, or like let other countries kind of like self-govern. And certainly if there's issues with like human rights violations, like that's something that should be brought up in the United Nations and dealt with accordingly. But I don't know, I think like the militarism is like extremely unnecessary and all of the violence is extremely unnecessary. And maybe we should consider when we're, like bombing Yemen and like bombing like hospitals in Yemen, that the people in those, like hospitals are like members of our family, and think about what that's like. Because I believe that to be like more dharmic. Certainly Vasudeva Kutumbakam is heavily related to dharma in terms of the notion of like family values within our culture.
Bharat?
So yeah, obviously, I would say that interventionism is bad, especially military intervention, economic sanctions, social issues, leveraging powers. I think there are a multitude of facets where we can make sure that human rights abuses, bombings, everything is covered, and making sure that people in other parts of the world are taken care of like they're our family. But with that said, the moment your family mistreats you, you cut them off. You don't give them more money. Or in the case of many other states, many other countries where the United States funds or actively is involved in, we have seen our efforts in order to benefit their economy or in order to benefit their society as a whole have been in vain. Afghanistan, Sudan, there's a multitude of countries where we've tried to bring real positive change without any real economic power or maybe a sphere of influence possibly. But other than that, we have gone to these countries and not expected any oil or any kind of big thing in return. And all we've seen is our troops get issued, our money gets wasted, and the money that we give or the social powers that we give ends up going in vain. So what my point is that Vasudeva Kutumbakam, the one world, or world as a whole family, that we're all brothers and sisters, is a great ideology. And it's a great outlook on life. However, if we try to implement policy solely on the intentions of being good family members, you'll end up regretting what most of the decisions you make, because you can't just start giving out money to your family members when they're in trouble. No, maybe you let them stay with you once in a while. Maybe you'll help them out. Hey, do this instead, or give them a piece of advice. But you don't ever just keep feeding them money or give them troops or always be the one to provide for them. You have to tell them, hey, now it's time for you to figure out what to do on your own, right? There's some point where you have to have that cut off. So what I'm trying to get at is that the United States is good in order to have a good foreign policy, good intention, all that, but we need to make sure the extent to which we do it is limited.
Okay, so I can talk about this a little bit. So when it comes to Vasudeva Kutumbakam, right, the whole world is a family, I believe that applies to individual people. In my opinion, it's just one saying, so it can't apply in every single context. But that specific phrase, I believe, applies to individual people. Like when you meet somebody from an enemy country, right? It's for that instance. It's not for, I don't think this is a foreign policy, like Bharat said, foreign policy strategy, right? So when it comes to American foreign policy, like we have first we have to understand that we have a luxury of like being the richest country in the world and also being far away from any conflict, like physically speaking. So we can talk all day about how we shouldn't intervene in Afghanistan and we should economically sanction Afghanistan if they turn into Taliban or whatever. But the countries that do have to worry about Afghanistan are India, right? Like right next door. They have to worry about actual terrorists coming in from the north and attacking India. We don't have to worry about that. So we can say, don't send our troops there and all of that stuff. But the countries that, like India right now, maybe they could send the troops, but like in the past, they couldn't. And the only people that could were the great powers that would use them for their own gains, right? So when I talk about, and I do believe that we should be pulling out from most of the world in terms of militarily speaking, but like we need to pull out, and our intentions need to be clear for what we want to do with how we want to interact with the rest of the world. In my opinion, we interact with the world mainly through our trade and our cultural hegemony, right? So when there's conflict and when there is human rights abuses and whatever else we talked about, there is an argument to be made that we should straight up invade and stop all abuses. Like we should invade China and stop the Uyghur genocide, right? But there's also an argument to be made that we can't do that, and B, it's not going to turn out well for everybody involved, right? And that has been the case for every single invasion we've ever done ever in the history of this country, from Philippines to Vietnam to the Middle East to everywhere, right? So like that's my reasoning behind why, if we want to protect the weak and achieve the dharma of our country, we have to first understand that we don't have the ability to solve every problem in the entire world, and if you want to consider it the family analogy, each family member is still their own person, and domestically and in their own domestic politics, they have, like it or not, they have the freedom to live the way they want to do. I wish we could topple dictators and fix the entire world, but we straight up cannot. And every time we've tried, we have gone down the wrong path.
Okay, well, I think there was a good amount of agreement on this topic.
Saket, can I just mention one thing that I forgot to talk about? The ruling party.
We are
Just the ruling party thing. 5 seconds.
You have 30 seconds, and I will mute you.
Oh, 15 seconds. That's it. So I think that it's important for us to also remember that the ruling party in the United States directly affects what kind of policy we see with India. And I think it's important because when we have strong ties with India and strong economic and social policy that incentivizes growth in India, we see a better sphere of influence as Hindu community in the United States. So when you're voting, make sure to keep that in mind as well.
Okay, great. We are out of time, but I did promise an audience question. So I'll sort of modify this, but as a sort of a Hindu minority group in America, how can we create a space for ourselves within each party? Or how can we, as Hindus, become more involved in the political process? You can kind of answer this as you want. Advaita?
Yeah, so I think that, like Bharat said, I think a huge way that we can do that is like voting. Certainly, hundreds of thousands of people have fought before us in our ancestry for us to have the right to vote today, for me to be able to sit here. And so I think that voting is a huge way that we can make change like within democracy. I also definitely think that we need a lot more like Hindu unity, not in like a very like nationalistic sense, but more in like understanding that we are minorities in a like colonizer country that is not set to like protect, that was not built on the foundation and still doesn't protect our interests. So, even if as Hindus we disagree on so many things, just amongst the three of us, you saw that today, I think just focusing on like raising, educating people about what Hinduism is about. Like very few people know anything, even our own people don't know about our own culture. And so I think that, advocating for, like correct representation of like what our culture is a huge way that we can create a space for ourselves within each party. And I also think that that's something that we can do to take down this notion of like model minority, that we're just people who will just keep our head down and conform. And I think that, right now we currently, to an extent, come off as like very like pushovery, that we will just tolerate discrimination, which is why we see so much like, Hindu phobia and all of these other like, like terrible things occurring like against Hindus. And so I think by like being more assertive through voting and through more unity, I think we certainly can make a space for ourselves within whatever party or, to make real change.
All right, Shaunak, Bharat, quick thoughts.
Yeah, so I just want to say, first of all, I don't think any of us should be like a voting block. Like Hindus should not be voting only Democrat or only Republican. You should vote based on your own policies. But what we should be, when it comes to politics, voting is not the only way that we get our voice heard. And one way that we get our voice heard is through collective action and through making our presence important on the political stage. So we could select, and this is how I think most like actual action committees get things done, is by selecting key issues that are important to them, and by making that like wedge issues that they will vote on this, or they will vote against you or for you unless you're on this side or which side of this issue. So issues like Kashmiri Hindus, issues like Hindu minorities in other countries being discriminated and pushed out, right? Or textbooks or things like that, that we as a Hindu community can actually agree upon, right? And so we see this a lot happening with Muslims and Jews, where they find specific issues that they will push on, and that makes them an important relevant aspect of the voting block, right? So we're not important or relevant because we have nothing that actually we care about so much that we're willing to put our vote on the line for. So we need to find things like that we actually care about and put our vote on the line for that.
Okay.
So I actually kind of agree with both Advaita and Shanak on this, that it's important to have Hindu unity, and it's important to have certain issues that we all have strong opinions about. But with all that, I feel like in the past, when other minority groups have done this, we have seen it become it essentially does become a voting block. And I refuse the idea of, yes, individually, we should all be going and voting for the passion that we believe in. And if we all agree on certain things, yes, vote for the same people. However, I do caution the idea that we should not try and partake in that identity politics idea, because eventually what has happened in the past is when a lot of African Americans decided to agree on a specific issue, they all eventually started thinking that, hey, this is the same issue, we're all going to become one big voting block. Same thing with Jewish Americans. So yes, there's differences in how we see Dharma or how we see different policies. And that's great. That's a wonderful thing about life, right? But at the same time, we need to make sure that when we do form action committees, or we do form specific instances where we all agree on specific issues, we should make sure that we refuse the idea of not falling into the identity politics area, because then that's when political parties start incentivizing these action committees and start persuading them to start voting on other issues that they may disagree with less than they agree with some other issue more. So it's important that we stay away from that idea.
And the way to solve that is to be, can I just take one real quickly, right? The strength of not being formed, not creating your whole group based on a specific identity. I mean, we have the Hindu identity, right? But the fact that we are focusing on issues itself, the strength of that is that we can be persuaded to vote on other stuff based on our intersectional identity or whatever, that's the strength of having issues as your main voting purpose, right?
I agree with Shanak wholeheartedly. Yeah.
Great. Okay, well, that about wraps it up. I think that was a pretty good conclusion question. So as this conversation sort of draws to a close, I'd just like to make a couple of remarks. First off, I hope that this conversation has inspired some of us to reflect upon this key question that we've been exploring. I think it is imperative that we avoid being knee-jerk partisans, right? And sort of think about how our personal understanding of Hindu Dharma plays a role in shaping our own political beliefs. And we should translate those political beliefs and preferences by voting. That's ultimately what we want to do here. And voting is a key right and responsibility that we are entitled to. And thus we should make full use of that right by showing up at our polling location and knowing whom we're voting for and why. So if you have not registered to vote yet or are uncertain of your registration status, you can visit vote.gov for more information. And to see what offices are up for election near you, ballotpedia.org provides a pretty good summary of those candidates and their views and record. So again, I hope that this conversation was informative and insightful. And I do urge everyone that we all do some research on those candidates that are near us and up for election, and do show up to vote. But other than that, I think I can thank everyone for joining, and big thank you to our panelists for donating their precious time for this panel. So I think we can call it a night here. Enjoy President's Day tomorrow, everyone, and we'll see you next time. Namaste.
Namaste. Thank you for having us, Saket.